What you're about to see is non-corporatized, non-propagandized activist news. And it's not a Russian hoax, I promise. We are independent activist news, and we need your help to keep going. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/actout. This week, a rundown on the fucked politics of Texas and why they matter to you. Next up, an Army veteran walks us through her time at Standing Rock, followed by a few pipelines that aren't DAPL that you could be fighting, possibly even in your own backyard. And finally, Hedges with a ray of hope through the clouds of depressive realism. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. To start off this week, I want to talk Texas. As you know, this show typically focuses on more national or even global issues, but via this brief primer on Texas's fucked up politics, I'd like to highlight why brushing off talk of Texas is both unhelpful and dangerous, and why the churning bigotry, sexism, racism, and hate in the Lone Star State matters to you. A conservative radio host that once claimed migrants bring leprosy and polio to our country, and that God is speaking through Duck Dynasty, now holds the most powerful office in Texas. And he wants to use that power to make the lives of struggling people like students, the transgendered, and undocumented immigrants even more miserable. He is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and he is this week's low-life scum.
You low-life scum.
Whenever you talk about terrible things happening in Texas, people start to tune out. You're thinking, of course, it's fucking awful. It's Texas. Why don't we just let them secede already? It's true. Texas politics seem like what happens when you apply dystopian novel The Handmaid's Tale as an instruction manual, but everything that happens there is a test balloon. The University of Texas at Austin motto is, "What starts here changes the world." And with most states and the U.S. Congress united behind that shit-stained Trump, you can certainly bet that we'll all be eating the same shit-filled Texas chili soon enough. Now, the Texas government is chock full of low-life scum, but due to the particular whims of Texas politics, the lieutenant governor is a scumbag who stands above all the rest. The lieutenant governor is not just president of the state senate, but also sets the agenda for the entire legislative session. The senators and reps have a lot of politics to get through in a short amount of time because, get this, the Texas state legislature only meets for 140 days every other year. Let me say that again, but slower. 140 days every other year. The rest of the time, that massive building is just a big, pink, ugly tourist trap. Now, before we get into what issues Patrick thinks are more important than all the rest, let me share a few fucked facts. Texas has one of the highest uninsured rates in the country, one of the highest rates of teen pregnancy, and is a leader in HIV diagnoses. In 2012, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave both Texas roads and flood control a D on their infrastructure report card. But don't worry, it's not like Texas roads ever flood. And as for education, Texas placed 43rd out of 50 states and D.C. in a poll published in January by Education Week. Now, Dan Patrick may look like a sitcom grandpa, but he's more likely to take away your rights than tuck you in with a cup of cocoa and a bedtime story. This is a guy that believes that there's no such thing as separation between church and state. I guess he's never heard of Thomas Jefferson. In 2004, issued an online warning against the evils of MTV. And if only it meant the evil of turning a once-beloved music channel into a quagmire of vapid reality shows, signaling the surge in anti-intellectualism and the death of good music, I'd be totally on board with him. But that's not what he meant. In 2013, Texas Monthly said Patrick, still a state senator, was one of the worst politicians in office. The magazine wrote, quote, "There are few types of lawmakers less helpful to the legislative process than bullies and ideologues. Unfortunately, Dan Patrick too often seemed to be both." Now that unhelpful bully ideologue is steering the ship. Where to, you ask? Well, let me share with you a few of Patrick's top 10 priorities for the opening session in January. Ignoring the fact that Patrick thinks reforming lawsuits over hailstorm damage is more important than healthcare or infrastructure, over half of these items on his list are designed to hurt the poor and make minorities suffer. First, the legislature will slash property taxes in order to further starve public schools. Then Patrick wants to force students into charter schools, even though charters frequently perform worse and hurt minority students most. Next, Patrick wants to end sanctuary cities, a term that the GOP made up to refer to any city offering protection to undocumented immigrants. Keep in mind, locking up immigrants is big business for Texas, which maintains multiple for-profit immigrant prisons with notoriously cruel conditions. Next up, over the summer, a court struck down the state's unconstitutional voter ID law. Not one to take civil rights lying down, Patrick's decided to waste taxpayer money bringing it back from the dead to shamble through the already rotting corpse of our democracy, making minorities and the elderly even less likely to vote. Next up, the, quote, Women's Privacy Act. Much like the right to work bills, this one seeks to step on the throats of we the people in such a way that we all focus on the shiny boots, the shiny language, rather than the heinous act itself. The Women's Privacy Act is simply a misnomered hate bill. It's the anti-LGBTQ bathroom bill disguised as a bill to protect us poor, helpless women from other women, I guess, using the bathroom. Assaulting or invading the privacy of anyone in a bathroom, regardless of gender, is already against the law. So the real purpose of these bills is to further exclude transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer people who already face high levels of violence and mental illness from public life. And keep in mind, along with whatever other riders they sneak on, North Carolina's version also blocked minimum wage increases and the right to sue for discrimination. But in Texas, if you oppose this bill, you're just framed as anti-women, which is really fucking ironic because Patrick wants to further weaken abortion rights in hopes of overturning Roe v. Wade. As a wedge, he uses the boogeyman of late-term abortions, which are actually extremely rare, medically necessary surgeries. He also invokes unscientific myths about fetal tissue sales based on those already debunked videos about Planned Parenthood. Now, if this all sounds like an excerpt from Donald Trump's most hateful wet dream, that's because it is. Texas is the second largest state, both by area and by population, and what happens there never stays there. So you can definitely expect to see some version of all these shitty laws in Congress someday soon, because the better they do in Texas, the stronger they'll come out swinging at our rights in the rest of the country. So instead of brushing off mention of the Lone Star State, instead of simply relegating it to the fuck it category, look for a way to build solidarity with Texas activists. These issues are already or soon will be your issues, so build together. Brainstorm and build a resistance to this bigotry, racism, sexism, and hate. Build a resistance to low-life scum.
You low-life scum.
Moving on, as a harsh winter descends on North Dakota, protectors have vowed to stay until the black snake is really, actually, finally dead. If you need a recap on recent events, check out our reporting in episode 90. And for some on-the-ground insight, we are joined once again by Emily Yates, Army veteran and activist.
So when I first got there, it was before like a massive group of veterans had shown up. So there weren't it wasn't like a veteran role. It was just like go there, volunteer as who you are. You know, it doesn't really matter like what your title is. You just want to do helpful things. And so I decided to. I was just like, I'll help wherever I'm needed. So I had a friend who was working in one of the kitchens, so I went down to work in one of the kitchens for a short amount of time. But the first thing that happened when we got there that like sort of stuck in my mind was one of the first things that when the person who greeted us when we arrived, it was this, Native woman who looked like she was in maybe her 30s or 40s, and she was like, welcome, we're glad you're here. This camp is a matriarchy. And I was like, oh, really? I didn't realize that. And so she said that, and there was no alcohol, drugs, or weapons allowed at the camp. And then the first thing that I actually had a chance to take part in was that afternoon. There was a women's march. It was a silent march. So it was a silent women-led march, and we like went up to the bridge and like completely silently, and like knelt down and flashed a peace sign at the militarized barricade guards, and then stood up silently and walked back. And it was nobody messed with us, and it was absolutely beautiful and empowering. So that was the first experience I had there. It kind of blew my mind in a great way, and showed me how like wrongly we go about resistance a lot of the time. Where like even a small amount of agitation can be enough to invite more more aggression.
What do you think are some of the key takeaways that you got from being there?
The key takeaways, I would say, one, that we're doing our society all wrong here in most of America. That I really saw what happens when people are prioritizing one another and the earth over profits. Also to see just the ways of interacting with the earth that are more like there's just a lot more adherence to the laws of nature as opposed to being trying to make nature work for us, trying to be in tune with that, and be honoring that and being aware of that is being aware of the whole organism of earth being connected, and just the other thing that was much different is just how much the elders and women and children are respected and cared for and heard, and just it's almost like the inverse of our society that we get used to. It's like white male centered, like young white male centered, and it's like actually there's way more wisdom in just about every other group.
Now I know that you were at the ceremony where the veterans apologized for years of oppression of Native peoples. Talk about how you felt as a veteran being there for that.
Yeah. So the forgiveness ceremony, that was a really interesting thing that happened. I'm not exactly sure who originated that idea, if it was Wes Clark or if it was the Native elders or who it was exactly. But it struck me as being the first time I could ever think of that having happened, and feeling like very very fortunate to be able to ask forgiveness, and to accept it, and not in person in that way. Like that's because I think a lot of us wish we could apologize and receive forgiveness for things that we do that we didn't realize what we were doing at the time. It felt amazing, and I felt really grateful to be able to be part of that group. To not only to feel like I wanted to ask forgiveness on behalf of this like horrible system that I've been embodying or that I have embodied in my life, but also just to be able to receive it that way, to like not only be able to ask but to be able to receive it, and to be like it really showed me a lot about forgiveness, and it made a big impression on me that these are individuals who've been, oppressed for hundreds of years by people wearing uniforms, a lot like the one I've worn, and they're able to be forgiving of that. So it just shows me like how unforgiving we tend to be in this culture, and how we like to just punish people and punish people and punish people.
What is your understanding of next steps, not just for the camp, but also for veterans?
I think that the next steps for Standing Rock, we need to be still taking guidance from the indigenous leaders of that camp and that movement. And right now, what they're saying is the best thing to do is to, unless you're deeply prepared for winter weather and to be self-sufficient, stay home and just donate materials or supplies or money or whatever for the time being. But beyond that, we spoke there a lot about how other pipelines and other threats to water, like such as Flint. There was, a really well-spoken veteran from Flint who came and said something, addressed everyone and said, we need to be doing this in Flint too. We need to be doing this in all the places where water is being threatened and where people's health is being threatened by these oil companies and by corporate interests, because this is all we have, So staying aware and staying vigilant is going to be really crucial. Not thinking of this as like the end to a news cycle or, oh, we've got this victory now, because right now there's no drilling, but just keeping our eyes on the long term and on the big picture and on all of the ways that what happened in Standing Rock is manifesting itself all over the world.
For more on the ongoing DAPL fight, be sure to check out the reporting and links from episode 90, including No DAPL Solidarity, where you can find ways to donate, as Emily mentioned. And also, as Emily mentioned, the importance of making connections to other pipelines. And while the actions in North Dakota have deservedly garnered international attention, DAPL is far from the only vicious pipeline tearing its way through people and planet in the name of profit. So this week, the fight against other pipelines is on the front lines. For those of you feeling bad that you can't join the fight against DAPL in North Dakota, fear not. There is very likely a pipeline project being constructed or slated to begin construction in your backyard. A quick search on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's site showed that in the first 9 months of 2016, this sad excuse for a regulatory office rubber-stamped 38 new gas pipeline projects. Again, that's just for this year, and that's just for gas pipelines. So let's take a look at a couple of these. How about the Dalton Expansion Project, 115 miles of pipeline that'll cut through Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia, and will also include the construction of a compressor station in Carroll County, Georgia. The pipeline would assist in moving gas from the Marcellus Shale to the southeast, while destroying some flora and fauna along the way. Because that's what pipelines do. FERC gave Transco the go-ahead back in August, even after the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service urged FERC to reevaluate the project, citing grave consequences for fish, wildlife, and water in the proposed pipeline's path. Field Supervisor Don Im noted that the pipeline project will still require the clearing of more than 425 acres of land, salvage operations, and open-cut installation of pipeline at 79 locations in the Etowah River Basin's Raccoon and Pumpkinville Creek systems. The project would also require the pumping of 1.5 million gallons of water for horizontal directional drilling at 2 crossings under the Consago River. But who gives a fuck about that, right? Not FERC, obviously. But maybe those watching who live in those areas give a fuck. Or how about anyone in Alabama or Florida? The Sabal Trail underground gas pipeline, also approved by FERC this year, is a 515-mile-long pipeline that would stretch from Alabama through Georgia and terminate in Florida. This $3 billion catastrophe has been called Florida's Dakota Access Pipeline and has already wreaked havoc in the construction phase via land seizure thanks to the abuse of eminent domain laws, construction violations, which include the dumping of hazardous waste materials and the drilling of mud into waterways. And, of course, the usual issue of the pipeline's path through conservation areas, under rivers and near springs. Not to mention the threat to the fragile limestone surrounding the Floridan aquifer, one of the largest freshwater aquifers in the world. Besides all of this, activists say that the mere construction of the pipeline is based on the falsehood, claiming that Floridians need more natural gas, when in fact, they have more than enough and actually don't want any more, suggesting that this gas is really meant for export, something that the gas industry has long salivated over due to the higher prices that LNG can win overseas compared to here at home. Now, there are other gas projects not on the most recent FERC list that require no less attention, such as the Spectra AIM pipeline, which we've covered before on the show. You may recall it's the one slated to run a mere 100 feet from a nuclear power plant. Activists have been battling this monstrosity for quite some time, and this fall, direct actions were taken that included occupying pipes, and last week, 12 activists were arrested stopping the pipeline's pull across the Hudson. Another gas pipeline that fueled creative activism, the Constitution Pipeline, proposed to run 124 miles from Pennsylvania to New York, and the focus of the Pancakes Not Pipelines protest here in D.C. earlier this year. In April, Pennsylvania farmer Megan Holleran brought the last of her family's maple syrup to the doorstep of FERC. Sharing her story and her syrup, sharing the story of her destroyed farm thanks to FERC's frack-happy agenda. And not only was her farm razed, but it was razed before the Constitution Pipeline even got final approval from FERC, making it even more obvious that FERC's review process is complete and utter bullshit. Indeed, as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said at a rally in Albany on the very same day that activists in D.C. protested outside FERC's offices, FERC is a rogue agency that is captured by the very industry it is supposed to regulate. We need to reclaim our democracy from corporations that routinely pollute our water and are now taking people's land for their profit. Indeed. And it turns out that that's exactly what activists are doing. Energy analysis firm Argus released an article last week stating that pipeline project delays were the dominant trend in 2016, and going on to write that an increase in public opposition to oil and natural gas infrastructure, regulatory delays, and in some cases, a lack of customer interest led to delays and cancellations of a few regional natural gas pipelines this year. And although Argus is mostly pinpointing LNG pipelines in the Northeast, the trend of what one analyst called, quote, pipeline purgatory is becoming more popular. Matthew Hosa, an analyst with BTU Analytics LLC, told Bloomberg in late November that activists are not only using their bodies to stop pipelines, but they're using the courts to ensnare projects in, quote, unending litigation on a state level. Nancy Vann, an activist with Safe Energy Rights Group, confirmed Hose's analysis, saying that she is very often in touch with locals in pipeline paths regarding rights of way and land rights. And while educating people on their rights is never a bad idea, the hope rests less on getting our injustice system to side with common sense and people or planet. The hope rests in bleeding these fuckers dry. In September of this year, Enbridge Energy withdrew their plans for the Sandpiper Pipeline, a proposed 616-mile-long black snake that would have run from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota, the same start point for DAPL, through Minnesota and pristine lake country, terminating in Superior, Wisconsin. But thanks to indigenous activists and environmental activists fighting for more than 2.5 years, it's dead for now. When asked about withdrawing the pipeline proposal, Mark Mackey, president of Enbridge Energy Partners, said, quote, extensive and unprecedented regulatory delays have plagued the Sandpiper pipeline. What that means in big oil speak is that it just got too fucking expensive. Indeed, just last week, an attorney for Energy Transfer Partners said that the company was losing $20 million a week due to the hold on finishing the Dakota Access Pipeline, and therefore asked a federal judge to issue a quick decision on forcing a completion of the pipeline. Unfortunately for them, the judge set a court hearing date for February. Meanwhile, the financial war against big oil continues, and as I mentioned a few weeks ago, you can easily and quickly show your support by moving your money out of oil and blood-soaked institutions. It is important here to note that although projects like KXL or Sandpiper, or indeed the Palmetto Pipeline, slated to carry gasoline, diesel, and ethanol, have all been shelved, there's no indication that the industry will let up. The aforementioned Constitution pipeline is still reeling from setbacks, but they have yet to give in, which means that we can't either. We have to remain diligent and continue to creatively combat these projects, whether that be via local litigation, blockades, pipe occupation, or something we haven't thought of yet. Get creative and join the fight that's happening in your area against big oil and gas. For more information on ongoing battles, you can always visit FERC's website to see what areas they've rubber-stamped for gas pipeline destruction, or look at the list at the end of the show, or indeed simply... Now to close out this week, here's a little Hedges with the quote of the day. Chris Hedges is well known for being a depressive realist, and in a recent article that chronicled how fucked we really are, he ended with what I found to be a rather uncharacteristic ray of hope, one that is still surrounded by the clouds of ominous reality, but one that inspired renewed vigor in me, and I hope will do the same for you. There will be rebels. They will live in the shadows. They will be the renegade painters, sculptors, poets, writers, journalists, musicians, actors, dancers, organizers, activists, mystics, intellectuals, and other outcasts who are willing to accept personal sacrifice. They will not surrender their integrity, creativity, independence, and finally their souls. They will speak the truth. The state will have little tolerance of them. They will be poor. The wider society will be conditioned by mass propaganda to write them off as parasites or traitors. They will keep alive what is left of dignity and freedom. Perhaps one day they will rise up in triumph. But one does not live in poverty and on the margins of society because of the certainty of success. One lives like that because to collaborate with radical evil is to betray all that is good and beautiful. It is to become a captive. It is to give up the moral autonomy that makes us human. The rebels will be our hope. And with that, fellow rebels, we'll wrap up this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Check out the last slide to see the sites mentioned in this week's show, including where to go for the pipeline fights. And be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.